Okay, welcome back, everyone. Sorry for the short delay. I just had one thing I had to take care of before we got started here this afternoon. So let's welcome back the the commission's Summer Flounder Scup and Black Sea Bass Board. I'm going to be joined by Adam Nowalski for the remainder of the afternoon as co-chair, and we're going to start with the Scup 2022 and 2023 specifications, and I'll turn to staff for the presentation.
Okay, great. Let me just.
Carson, yeah, go ahead, Carson, whenever you're ready. I didn't mean to catch you off guard.
Before we
sorry,
start
Adam,
that,
go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, did you still intend to go back to Greg DiDomenico for his comments he wanted to make in question?
Oh yeah, we can do that first. Yeah, I'll give Carson a second. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I took a note, but then it's not in front of me. So yeah, Greg, did you have something you wanted to bring up before we start?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. In fact, it probably also applies to the presentation that will be done on black sea bass. So if you'd like me to wait or until we do black sea bass, that's fine. I know you guys are under a little bit of a time crunch here, so I can wait until black sea bass because it's I believe the issue I have is in both fluke and in black sea bass. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, we can wait till the end. That's fine with me. Yeah, and we're not really under a really serious time crunch. I mean, we're a little over our scheduled start time, but yeah, we're it's all good. So if you'd rather wait, Greg, I can get back to you afterwards. After we get through Black Sea Bass.
I can wait. Yeah, I can wait, Mr. Chair. Please proceed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and do that then. We'll just and remind me, Greg, just raise your hand as we get towards the end of Black Sea Bass. We can bring it up then. I have a couple other hands before we start. Julia, your hand's up, and I also have Tom Fody. Let me go to Tom and see. Tom, did you have something you wanted to raise before we start?
Yeah, when Greg brought up about the monitoring committee report, I thought I had something in the back of my head. I forgot to ask at the same time. I noticed when we put out the recruitment, we only went back to 94 or 92. I mean 84, not as far back as we used to go. I'd like to get those earlier years back in there. The reason I'm saying that is when we had a lower biomass and we had smaller fish, because there were basically no big fish around, we still had better recruitment than we have now. So I think that's important to keep in the record so we can use that as a reference. Because I brought this up a couple of times. Is when we look at the size of the spawning stock biomass with fluke, it really pays no attention to what recruitment is, yet we basically manage it by restricting it because the spawning stock biomass is not where we want it. So I just think that's important to keep in the record and basically should keep it in the chart.
Okay, we'll take a note and we'll see what staff and the Science Center do, in the future. And Paul Rego's on the phone or he's on the call. So let's. Your point is noted. That's the best I can do for you right now, Tom.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So with that said, let's go ahead back to Carson for the Scup 2022-2023 specs, and we'll conduct business as we had earlier this morning. And I'll go ahead and turn to Carson for the presentation. Go ahead, Carson, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're doing something very similar for Scup as we have done for Bluefish and Summer Flounder earlier today. We're setting 2022 and 2023 specifications. Yep, so this slide is an outline of the presentation today. Very similar to Summer Flounder, we're going to review the Scup 2021 management track assessment results. We're going to look at recent fishery performance and the AP fishery performance report. And then Paul Rego will give an overview of the SSC recommendations. We'll move on to the monitoring committee recommendations, and then that second AP meeting with feedback after the monitoring committee. And then the objectives for this meeting are for the council and board to adopt specifications for Scup and review 2022 commercial measures and recommend changes if warranted. So according to the 2021 management track assessment that included data through 2019, the Scup stock was not overfished and overfishing was not occurring. And this most recent stock assessment did not use 2020 data given COVID-19 related data gaps. So this figure includes spawning stock biomass and recruitment, including the spawning stock biomass target in the black horizontal line. And looking at the vertical bars that indicate recruitment, you can see that 2019 was the lowest recruitment year of the time series, and recruitment has been below average in recent years. So the biomass is projected to continue to decline. And then this graph shows Scup total catch and fishing mortality through 2019 from the management track assessment. And as I mentioned, overfishing was not occurring in 2019. So transitioning into fishery performance, this graph shows both commercial and recreational landings for Scup through 2020. And commercial landings are shown by the blue line. They decreased a little bit by about 0.2 million pounds from 13.78 in 2019 to 13.58 in 2020. For the recreational sector, landings decreased by about 1.2 million pounds from 14.12 in 2019 to 12.91 in 2020, which is shown by the green line. And as a reminder, the recreational harvest in this graph for 2020 is using that imputed data. So this table shows commercial quotas compared with landings in recent years. So looking at the right-hand column, you can see that since 2015, landings have been 16 to 45% below the commercial quota. And in 2020, 61% of the quota was landed. And this table shows the recreational harvest compared with the RHLs. And from 2016 to 18, 70 to 98% of the RHL was harvested, and this is based on the old MRIP values. And then the 2019 RHL was set with old MRIP, so cannot be compared to 2019 harvest, which was estimated using the new MRIP values. But the 2020 harvest and RHL both use the new MRIP numbers, so they can be compared. But once again, 2020, the data was using those imputed estimates, and the recreational harvest was 198% of the RHL. So as you'll recall, the new MRIP numbers were much higher than previous estimates, and Scup biomass is declining and the allocations are fixed. So the RHLs did not scale up with the new MRIP numbers. So now I'll get into the Scup specific AP comments from the fishery performance report, since I already covered the comments that are related to all three species during the summer flounder presentation. So as was discussed more generally, advisors commented that COVID-19 had major impacts on the Scup market prices and landings. And advisors said that there was less recreational fishing effort, especially on for hire vessels, and felt that the 2020 Scup MRIP estimates of harvest were too high. One advisor recommended a cumulative length limit approach in the recreational Scup fishery that could be tested for the shore-based mode and then expanded to all modes. And then another comment received via email was that Scup have been abundant over the past 2 years. And there are other comments, but I'll get into those during the commercial measures discussion. So with that, I will turn it over to Paul Rego for the SSC recommendations.
Yeah, thanks, Carson. Yeah, Paul, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Carson. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so the SSC had some comments. These comments are, as you'll see in the structure, we normally discuss the presentation and basic science first, and then we go into our terms of reference. As noted, this was a 1-year update with 1 year of additional data, the benchmark in 2015. There was no changes in the model structure apart from adding a selectivity stanza for 2013. Now that is important because that is reflecting in part the consequences of the large 2015 year class. As a result of that, there were larger than average discards during the period 2015 to 2018. There's no important or significant retrospective pattern in this assessment, so it tends to be fairly well behaved. Like for summer flounder and bluefish, there are changes in average weights and maturation. However, these are in fact considered directly in the biological reference points, so they had some very modest changes in terms of the resulting change in the FMSY and the BMSY level. The stock is in good shape. It's roughly, as the graph illustrated earlier, it is roughly 2 times the BMSY level. There's no strong evidence of any trend in recruitment, but it's likely that the research track assessment in 2022 will look at perhaps what we call parametric stock recruitment model and so forth. We did review a constant ABC quota in which there was an instance of the P-star exceeding 0.5. I'll come back to this theme again a little bit later as we go forward. Next slide, please. Okay, the SSC did make recommendations regarding the OFL for this stock. Again, it's a well-behaved, data-rich stock at this point. Its CV is 60%. To answer an earlier question from Greg DiDomenico, is there any chance that the bluefish will make the 60% bar when it is revised? It's not clear. This, in contrast to Scup and summer flounder, which are data-rich stocks, the bluefish is data poor by comparison. It has, as noted, there's a lot of high-quality data, consistent signals, and the data sort of agree with the theory kind of across the board. It is there are some information about thermal habitat, and it has been examined and to see whether it has an influence on availability. But so far, no adjustment for thermal habitat effects appears to be warranted. Next slide, please. Next, I'll turn to the recommendations for the ABC. The SSC used a CV of 60%, as noted before, and because the BMSY, the current biomass to the biomass at maximum sustainable year ratio is greater than 1, the council risk policy allows a P-star, that is the risk of overfishing, to be 0.49. Now that's just 1/10 or 1/100th of, it's actually just 1% less than the 0.5 value for probabilities. That's kind of a legal constraint on this. And so when we evaluated a constant harvest scenario in which you take a little bit less out in the first year and a little bit more out in the second year, that resulted in a P-star value that was 0.516. So it's just over the line. And so that one could not be considered further by the SSC. So only the SSC, only the ABCs associated with a variable P-star were in fact considered here. And this brings up a general point, one that will recur again when we get to black sea bass, is that when the stock is very high, that is, the risk policy becomes 0.49 there. So though, if you try to do a constant ABC approach, which is derived by averaging the year 1 and year 2, or year 1, 2, and 3 together, there are going to be instances where that P star value will be 0.5 greater than 0.5. So it's a small technical point, but it's one that we'll have to work together to sort of work out the details. So it won't be the simple average of the P star values. The P star values are conditioned on a particular sequence, as opposed to just simply saying, well, it doesn't matter when you take them out, which is what the average value does. In terms of sources of uncertainty, next slide, please. One of the issues here is that older age Scup, that is more than 3 years old, are really dominant in the assessment model. But most of the assessment is based on survey indices that do not include ages 3+. So our information, our perception of the underlying dynamics are driven principally by catches and our baseline information on what we think incoming year class strength has been. And there is a selectivity pattern which is estimated in the model that does reduce Fs on the older aged fish in the population. So those are major sources of concern, because if you're wrong about that, as if the selectivity pattern changes somehow, fish that were previously thought to be less vulnerable become more vulnerable, you can have a problem or a greater risk of uncertainty. The SSC had some questions about why F 40%, why SSB 40%. So that's the basis of that proxy, and that will be examined, as I mentioned earlier, when the benchmark is addressed. The sensitivity to Scup availability is another area where additional work can be valuable here. So in terms of research recommendations, next slide, please. The SSC recommended further investigation of this selectivity, as I mentioned earlier, on the older fish. Questions about the basis for natural mortality, which also leads to questions about why 40% maximum spawning potential. There are other sources of age length data from historical surveys that might be useful in terms of informing part of the overall time series. There's a need to continue monitoring the declines in weights at age and increases in age at maturity. Again, these may be density effects, since the stock is 2 times higher than we think its long-term MSY level is. The benefits of the gear restriction areas on recruitment have been investigated for some species, and do seem to have some important role in that, but perhaps a more formal exposition of that influence could be valuable. There experiments to look at catchability in the NFSC surveys have been useful for other species, and so there's no reason to expect that such experiments could not also be helpful for looking at Scup. There's the need to always improve discard estimates and estimates of discard mortality and so forth. And just following on a common theme, which kind of went through the entire meeting, was the fact that there's the port sampling issues are important and need to be are a concern, kind of a longer term concern within the for the assessment performance. And so my last slide is the bottom line. This table reflects the scenario that is a P star value, not a constant one. The stock is going down because of the 2015 year class is sort of leaving the population, so to speak, as it gets older and dies. So there's a slight decrease in the OFL and a decrease in the ABC as well. In both instances, the probability of overfishing is set at the 0.49. I want to bring to your attention that 13,648 is not the number that's in the SSC report. Thank Carson for identifying that revised number 13,648, which has been revised here. So my apologies for that. I'm not sure how we can have 20 people looking at the same thing for 2 or 3 hours at a time and not pick that up, but we did, and so I apologize. So it's 60 tons less than the number that you'll see in the SSC report under tab 14. So with that, I'll end and appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Paul. Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up. Nobody's at fault. It's sometimes things get through the goalie, and it is what it is. So, Carson, did you have more to present, and then we're going to get to a staff recommendation? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, go ahead, Carson, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So based on those SSC ABC recommendations, this is the flow chart that shows how the quota and RHL are calculated for Scup. And so from the recommended ABC, 78% is allocated to the commercial fishery as a commercial ACL, and 22 is allocated to the recreational fishery as a recreational ACL. And this percent is dictated by the FMP. And then ACTs can have a reduction from the ACLs for management uncertainty. And then the quotas and RHLs are calculated by subtracting projected discards from the sector-specific ACTs. So projected discards come from the stock assessment and then are apportioned between commercial and recreational fisheries using the average percent of dead discards attributable to each sector over the past 3 years. So using that flow chart, these are the monitoring committee recommended measures for 2022 and 23 compared with the current 2021 measures. And because of the lack of constant ABC recommendations from the SSC, the monitoring committee discussed that they would need to recommend ACTs resulting in a total catch limit lower than what the SSC recommended in order to keep limits constant across the 2 years. And they agreed that they could not justify recommending constant limits if it meant recommending lower ACTs and foregoing quota. So the monitoring committee recommendation includes setting the ACT equal to the ACLs consistent with their recommendations over the past several years. And then this recommendation also uses a 3-year average of discards from each sector. And this is what was done in the past as well. And then this required using 2017 through 2019, since we don't have 2020 discard estimates at this point. And then the resulting quotas and RHLs are shown in bold. So these monitoring committee recommendations would result in commercial quotas of 20.38 million pounds in 2022 and 17.87 million pounds in 2023, and recreational harvest limits of 6.08 and 5.41 million pounds in 2022 and 23. So as already mentioned, there is the ongoing commercial recreational allocation amendment. If allocations are modified through that action in December, new allocations would be applied to that 2023 ABC. So catch and landings limits would change, but ABCs would not change. So along with landings limits, the monitoring committee considered whether changes to commercial measures are needed. So in June 2021, the council received a request from Lund's Fisheries to have the monitoring committee analyze decreasing the commercial minimum fish size from 9 inches to 8 inches, and also increasing the winter one possession limit from the current 50,000 pounds to 100,000 pounds, or eliminating this possession limit entirely. And this proposal was also discussed by the AP in June during their fishery performance report meeting. And then the new AP discussed this in late July after the SSC and monitoring committee recommendations. So at the June meeting, the June AP meeting, 2 advisors did not support an 8-inch minimum size due to maturity concerns and wanting to maintain a healthy spawning stock biomass. One advisor supported an 8-inch minimum size, saying that some people prefer to buy a smaller sized fish. And then comments on this topic received via email after the meeting were that decreasing the minimum size could increase discards by shifting effort to smaller scup. And this person also added that the fresh market will not be able to sell a scup that small. And then in terms of discussing changes to the possession limit, 2 advisors did not support an increase in the possession limit due to the risk of tanking the price for the fresh fish market or competition from larger vessels shifting their effort. And one advisor said this increase was not needed because fishermen don't typically land the current possession limit. And then email comments on this topic from an advisor had similar sentiments, including that the increase would open the fishery to much larger vessels. It would destroy the fresh fish market. And also they added that larger trip limits would lead to even more discards. The monitoring committee discussed this request, and specifically, I'll go over the minimum size discussion first. They did have some concerns. So based on Northeast Fisheries Science Center survey data, the proposed decrease in minimum size to 8 inches total length would allow for the harvest of scup at a size where about 57% are mature. And at the current minimum size, about 84% are mature at 9 inches total length. So monitoring committee members were concerned with too much harvest of immature fish, as well as the potential for shifting the fishery selectivity to smaller or younger scup caught. And then they also noted that 2019 is the lowest recruitment in the time series, and recruitment has been low for the past 3 years. So they also discussed scup discard reasons, and based on the SBRM report, in July 2018 to June 2019, 53.8% of scup discards were due to size regulation, 36.5% were due to no market, and the rest were due to quota, poor quality, or other reasons. So there is the potential to decrease a portion of the dead discards due to size regulations, with decreasing the minimum size as long as smaller fish did not become targeted. But it was unclear how many of those undersized scup are 8 inches total length versus smaller sizes. And then one monitoring committee member said that in the future, they would be interested in exploring some sort of bycatch allowance for undersized fish, especially in high recruitment years when they're hard to avoid. But ultimately, all monitoring committee members recommended that the minimum size remain 9 inches in total length. So the monitoring committee also discussed Lund's request for possession limit increases or elimination. And based on a staff analysis, in 2018 to 2020, less than 1% of scup trips in winter 1 landed more than 20,000 pounds, and no trips were found to have over 40,000 pounds landed. So this had suggested that the current possession limit of 50,000 pounds was not limiting harvest opportunities in winter 1. However, one monitoring committee member and industry members on the call noted that trips are being landed higher than 40,000 pounds, but may be spread over multiple dealers and multiple days. So VTR and dealer data need to be matched by hand across multiple databases. So because of issues with capturing high volume trips and no unique trip identifier, trips were hand matched across multiple databases by Garfo APSD staff to produce the table on this slide. So this is an updated table that was not included in the staff commercial measures memo, but was received recently. And based on this table, very few scup trips are using the current 50,000 pound possession limit. And based on this updated analysis, very few are landing greater than 20,000 pounds of scup, and 1 to 2% of trips that landed Scup in winter one landed over 40,000 pounds per trip. And this is thought to better capture the trips during winter one. So the monitoring committee also discussed that if biomass continues to decline on its trajectory due to the recent poor recruitment and market demand increases or stays the same, then an increased or eliminated possession limit could lead to harvesting 80% of the quota more quickly in winter one. So once 80% of the winter one quota is landed, the possession limit drops to 1,000 pounds. So this could lead to decreased harvest opportunity for some vessels or regions along the coast that may fish later in the winter one period. And winter one is January through April. So the monitoring committee noted the difficulty in understanding the implications of a doubling of the possession limit and supported further analysis of the potential impacts of higher trips on bycatch, the unintentional shifts in access by different user groups, the impacts to smaller fleets in fresh markets, and a more holistic look at why the quota is being underharvested throughout the year, not just in the winter one period. And then moving forward in future years, they supported analyzing incremental increases. So ultimately, the monitoring committee recommended no changes to the winter one quota period possession limit for 2022. And then in terms of other commercial measures, the monitoring committee also recommended no changes. And then the new AP met after the monitoring committee meeting in July in order to comment on the assessment results and the SSC and monitoring committee recommendations. And they voiced similar concerns with the proposed changes to commercial measures as the previous AP meeting. 4 advisors did not support a decrease in the Scup minimum size and increase in the winter one possession limit in the commercial fishery for various reasons. So 2 advisors were specifically concerned that an increased possession limit would encourage greater harvest from much larger boats that are capable of hauling several hundred thousands of pounds of fish per trip. And they felt that this would harm the current fleet of smaller fishing vessels and their businesses. Also, the winter price per pound for Scup can go over $1 or more, and the fishery can be very important to the current fishermen during that time. And then one advisor said that 8-inch Scup are a bony fish with no meat, so they could not see the advantage of decreasing the size limit, noting that even 9 to 10-inch Scup can ruin the market when that size is landed. Another advisor said his concerns with decreasing the minimum size related more to the poor Scup recruitment in recent years, especially in 2019, and did not feel that harvesting more immature fish was a good idea for stock health. One advisor said that all 3 species should have a 4 3/4 or 5-inch net, and the minimum fish size should be reduced to the size of the net. And he said he would support moving to an 8-inch minimum fish size or lower to better compete with tilapia imports. And another advisor representing Lund's Fisheries supported their proposed changes, but stated that they understood why the monitoring committee would require more analyses, and they were happy to support this in any way needed throughout the process, and added that the winter one fishery has room to grow and Lund's has no intention of fishing on smaller fish, and the minimum size decrease would allow for keeping a portion of their current catch that is discarded. So that's all I have for my presentation, and then the decision points are to adopt 2022 and 2023 ACLs, ACTs, and commercial quotas and RHLs, and then make any recommendations or comments on commercial measures. And leave this on the monitoring committee recommended catch and landings limits. That's all I have.
All right, Carson, thank you very much for your presentation. Dr. Rego, thank you for yours as well. I do have a question for you, Carson. Was there any discussion about the poor recruitment over the last couple years as to what, I mean, I realize recruitment, a lot of it has to do with environmental conditions, Was that something that surfaced in the discussion for the poor recruitment for the last, I think you said 3 years now? It's been pretty poor.
Right. So that wasn't directly speculated on reasons why. It was more often just noted that it was concerning by various groups, whether it was the monitoring committee or the AP.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, with a spawning stock as healthy as it is, it just seems a little off to me that we're not, I mean, a lot of it's environmental. I'm sure it's, it's what we deal with a lot of other stocks, but I just wanted to know if anyone was discussing that. So, okay, well, thank you. Paul Rago, I see your hand up. Did you have something you wanted to offer?
Oh, just one note. We did talk about it in the SSC meeting, but as Carson noted, there was no strong indication of a trend in recruitment at this point. So although they have been low, it does not appear to be part of a larger trend. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that, Paul. I appreciate that. So I have Michelle Duvall. I see your hand up. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation, Carson. Ton of information. So I was wondering, I thought, I noticed in the memo and on the slide that it said that like we couldn't compare 2019 harvest against the recreational ACL because of the conversion to FES numbers, but I thought we got that catch accounting information for, Scup and Seabass in February. And I thought I remember talking about that at the February meeting, and that, I remember there was a little bit of a snafu or mix up with the black sea bass discard numbers, but I thought Scup came in below, both commercial and recreational ACLs.
Yeah, yes, you are correct. Once back calibrated MRIP estimates were produced, it was a small underage for 2019. You are correct.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Carson. Peter Defer, and then Adam Nowalski after Peter. Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Paul. I think this question is for you because it's mostly biology. And that has to do with your comment about the thermal habitat. I guess that's a thermal regime, and that I assume that means that refers to the thermal preference for the species at the adult level, or is it at the time of spawning? And it's related to a secondary inquiry that I've got. So let me get your answer to that first, I think.
Our discussions really didn't partition it with respect to life stage. It was directed as in terms of there had not been an update of the work that would more specifically look at the overall thermal niche of the species and whether it has a discernible impact on the performance of the model itself.
Okay, follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, please go ahead, Peter.
Yep, Paul. The reason I was interested in that comment from the SSC had to do with my question about a question I have had about whether or not it's possible to understand how a decrease in the habitat affects the stock size in terms of decreasing the amount of habitat, or part B, decreasing the quality of that habitat. And I know it's easier to determine that when we were talking about an anadromous species like shad and river herring, when you're closing off a spawning river, or even perhaps coastal species when you have a nearshore habitat that's either been eliminated / reduced or altered in such a way so that it's no longer usable. But is it possible to determine the relationship between the habitat quantity or quality and the stock size?
Yeah, well, I don't know if we can or not. I think it's a really intriguing question. The Scup resource is currently at 2 times its what we think is the BMSY level, consistent with the recruitment streams that we've seen. So if the thermal habitat is more has been reduced, then either the density within the preferred habitat increases, or the fish are in less preferred habitats. Both of those could act to create the sort of the general conditions that we have observed, which are, slower than average growth rates, weights at age, or delays in maturation. So I think there's no question that these factors can be important, are important, but in terms of the actual mechanics of estimating those quantities, that's what hasn't been done, nor has the estimation of those quantities over time, which is what you would need in order to sort of tease out the effects that you just mentioned. So I
Thank you,
hope that
Paul.
answers the question. Yeah.
Yep. A final comment, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, please go ahead,
Yeah.
Peter.
Yeah, so Paul, this query of mine dates back to some concerns over flounder several years ago when we were worried about the quality of inshore spawning habitat, and we actually had a presentation by an investigator out of Sandy Hook, who did a presentation for us because we were curious about whether or not we could make any clear relationship between reduction in habitat quality and spawning and subsequent recruitment. And then it occurred again when, in a discussion I was having with Sarah Geiches about the expansion of the black sea bass population into a broader range of areas with no apparent diminution in stock, and in fact, probably an expansion. So that's where that's coming from. And I think that the question still remains out there about whether or not we can make a relationship between habitat, critical habitat especially, and stock size. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Paul.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. It's a great question and something to explore. Adam Nowalski, I have your hand up next. Go ahead, Adam.
Very good. Thank you very much. So this is a question regarding the varying and constant ABC approach that was evaluated here. If I'm understanding correctly and having seen what the ABCs are as a result of the varying approach, that have a corresponding probability of overfishing of 0.49, which is in line with what Magnuson allows. We have, by going with the varying approach, we have neither left any fish in the water as a result of going to the level of probability of overfishing that we're legally allowed to, nor have we exceeded our risk tolerance set out in the risk policy given the stock status. If I understand correctly, we haven't left any fish in the water, haven't exceeded our risk tolerance with the varying ABCs that have been recommended. And in following up to that, where it was indicated that a reevaluation of the implementation of the constant ABC policy may be warranted, is that something that the SSC will talk about themselves and bring some ideas back to us? Is that a topic that would come up at our next joint council SSC conversation? Is that something that leadership would come up with, or is there something that we need to take proactive action to take a look at what other options there might be to allow for constant ABCs in the face of very populous stocks?
Thank you. Yeah, I don't think there's any major heavy lift associated with this adjustment. The consequence of taking a little bit more out in the first year and foregoing that in the second year when you do the averaging approach is very small. So in order to avoid having the excess risk that is exceeding 0.5 in the second year, you just would have to reduce that average by a little bit. So if you have 10 in one year and 20 in the next year under a risk under a variable policy, and you want to take out the average of 15 each year, so that you just do a simple average, the 15 in the second year may be too high. So all you need to do is back that off a little bit, say 14.5 or 14, and then you would get that. So you would leave a little bit of fish in the water, so to speak, under that type of policy, but you would gain the stability associated with having a change of that magnitude. And in the case of going from 0.516 down to 0.49, the change in the associated quota with an average year over that 2-year span would be, I think, pretty small. So it would satisfy the risk policy, satisfy the Magnuson requirements, and satisfy the desire to have non-varying catch quotas. Thank you.
All right,
So
thanks,
the follow-up
Paul.
to that, Mr. Chairman, whether it
Yeah, I
comes
was just
from
gonna
you
turn-
or from staff, how do we pursue giving the SSC that flexibility to at least make that recommendation to us in the future? And then whether we choose that there's a management benefit of leaving a few fish in the water or not, at least we have that recommendation from the SSC to consider whether we want to proceed that way.
Right.
What's the way
Right.
forward to get that flexibility?
Yeah, let me go. I'm gonna go to Brandon Muffley. He's got his hand up. He might have some thoughts as to how we get there, Adam. So let me go to Brandon first, and I see Greg DiDomenico's hands up as well. Go ahead, Brandon, if you're able to speak on this.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize. I'm in the middle of a pretty good thunderstorm here, so if you hear some lightning and thunder behind me, just bear with me. So yeah, just to this point, I think I think this is going to be a point that Paul was going to bring up during his general SSC deliberations on Thursday. But I think if it's the will of the council to have the SSC sort of evaluated, because I think we want to ensure we're applying a consistent policy for this across all of our species. As Paul had mentioned, it's really going to be an issue when stocks are at really high levels of abundance, but we want to make sure if our stocks are there that we are applying a consistent approach when we're in that situation. And so I think if the council wants us to do that, then I will certainly work with the SSC to develop a standardized approach for how we can go about doing that, and we can bring that back to the council for your review at a later date.
All right, thanks for that, Brandon. Chairman Nowalski, does that help you with your question?
I think that was very comprehensive. I mean, certainly I think, the public's going to weigh in on the merits of leaving fish in the water for the sake of equal ABCs over multiple years. but I certainly think it's at least a discussion worth having, and it sounds like Brandon's prepared to work with the SSC to bring that back to us without any further action today, if I'm hearing that
Okay.
correctly.
Yeah, that's how I understood it as well. Thanks, Brandon, for that, and thanks, Adam, for bringing that question up. Okay, let's go before we take up a motion. Let me see if there's anyone from the public. I see Greg DiDomenico's hand up. Greg, did you have a question regarding the presentation?
Yes, and the specific point I'd like some clarification on. Are we
Okay.
talking about a policy regarding management stability? Because this I chose to bring up during the monitoring committee meeting and voiced my concerns at that point. And if I could just follow up, but is that what we're talking about now? Another policy, and that's called management stability?
Well, I'm not sure that. Maybe I can turn to staff. I don't think that there's, I mean, from my discussions with Chris and staff, there's no new policy that we're discussing. But maybe I can get a little help from Chris or staff on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah,
no,
go ahead, Chris. Do you have
we haven't-
anything
we haven't-
for Greg on this?
Sure. Yeah, we haven't discussed it as a new policy. It's certainly something that we can talk about, but never as a policy. No.
Okay, so I want to remind everybody what I reminded the monitoring committee last week. During the 2007 specifications process, the SSC recommended a very large increase to the Scup quota at that time, the Scup OFL, I believe, or the ABC. It went to the monitoring committee and it was cut in half. The increase was cut in half. And it was due to quote unquote stability. I don't think that is a policy that should be taken lightly. It's quite frankly kind of arbitrary. And what are its merits and how do we judge management stability? At the time, I probably did not make enough of an issue of it in 2017, but now that it's come back up and was discussed again, and is quite frankly leaning towards more conservative recommendations, someone really needs to explain to me what to expect from this policy, whether or not it's something that's not recommended. Where's the guidance from the agency on this? Are we just going to limit quotas in the sake of management stability, which is seems to be in the eye of the person making the recommendations? Can someone please inform me as to what we're doing here? Thank you.
Okay, I appreciate the comments, Greg. I don't have an answer for you. I see Chris Moore's hand up, and then Carson also put something in the chat that she said she had some thoughts. So let me start with staff. I go to Chris first and then Carson after that. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I don't know if this is going to help or not, Greg, but I think it's fair for us as a council, for the SSC, to have discussions related to stability as it pertains to the industry, stability as it pertains to management measures from one year to the next. And I really see no issue with that from the perspective of having folks think about it, provide recommendations relative to it. I think just like I know, that the industry prefers stability from one year to the next as it relates to quotas and harvest, as it pertains to the economics of these fisheries. But it's not like an overriding policy where we say every year we want stability as the first thing we think about. It's just a consideration. It's part of our discussion. I think it's happened every year that we've talked about quotas.
And Chris, the question is when it is severe, like it was in 2017, it was cutting the SSC recommendation in half. That's a problem. Small adjustments either way, perhaps fine, but none of this stuff happens in a bubble, right, Chris? So here we are talking about underages, overages, potential allocation shifts, the next stock assessment. If we're going to do this, then perhaps we have to remember that these quotas could have been higher. Perhaps our catch could have been higher, and perhaps this leads into the discussion of whether or not we take any action on the Lund's request for a larger trip limit. So if we're going to have equal consideration of all these topics about stability, but artificially hold back the industry, then I think that's a big mistake, and I think it's going to have serious consequences going forward. I have no problem with having the discussion. I have no problem with small changes either way, but this started in 2017. It was a significant amount, and I think that needs to be clarified as to how we're going to do this going forward.
Mr. Chair, I think Carson has something to say. Carson?
Yeah, if Carson wants to chime in, that's great. I'm just trying to manage the hands here. I see a number of hands just came up. Go ahead, Carson.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I think some of the stability conversation has been around constant versus varying ABCs, which over the 2-year span is not necessarily leaving fish on the table. And then some of the other discussion, the 2017 recommendation from the monitoring committee was a buffer at the ACT level because of the large increase in quota. So I just wanted to point out like the different levels that those were happening at.
Okay.
Mike, may I just say one other thing, please?
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
And I would also mention that if we're going to apply this to Scup, I think we should start applying it to the other species as well. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that comment. I want to stay with the public at this point, since we're trying to get some questions answered. And I'm going to go to Gus Lovegren. Go ahead, Gus.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my name's Gus Lovegren. I'm the owner operator of the fishing vessel Lily Rose. Also a member of the Fisherman's Dock Cooperative out of Point Pleasant, New Jersey. When it comes to our winter fisheries, porgies is what we do. We pay our bills with fluke and sea bass, and porgies is basically the money I make to get me through the summer, because summer is my slow time of the year. I'm a small boat fishery, 75 foot. We've never put 50,000 on this boat, and it's not because we can't, but because it's just, it would have had to been the perfect circumstances for us to get 50,000 on the boat. But I can't tell you how many times I put the net in the water and towed for 5 minutes, and we had 30 or 40,000 pounds behind the boat. My father's one of the originators of this porgy industry. He's one of the people that built it and publicized it to make it worth a fishery that we could make a living off of, along with a lot of the fishermen in New Jersey and New York. And we built this as a small boat fishery. I can't remember the last time our quota was fulfilled. I believe it's been at least 10 years. And there was a shift. I think our winter one fishery, the limit was pounds every 2 weeks. I think that was 10, 15 years ago. And it shifted from that to 50,000 pounds a day. Now, with that 50,000 limit, we have yet to see the winter one fishery quota filled in, I believe it's 12 years. It may be more than that. And, we're already seeing, with the quota not being fulfilled, the recruitment levels down. I just want to say I can't see 100,000 pound trip limit or even a no limit fishery for this. It would put me out of business. When we've had reductions in our quota for fluke, summer flounder, for sea bass, nobody said to me, nobody gave me the option to fish for it. Nobody handed me scallop quota so that I could make up the difference and make my living. And I'd hate to see this fishery shifted and taken away from us when it's like the one thing we have left right now. And as for landings this last year, I could personally attain that the lower amount of landings has nothing to do with the inability to catch the fish or the population being down, but it has to do with the markets for COVID. I avoided the fish at all costs because it just was not a financially savvy idea to fill the boat with fish that might cost me money to take off the boat. I just want to make it heard that, my opinion on this is to keep the current fishery status quo. I don't think I would be completely offended if I saw a reduction in the overall quota for the winter one fishery, because again, I can't remember the last time it's actually been filled. And that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Yeah, Gus, thanks for your comment. Thanks for being part of the discussion. I really appreciate that, and I'm sure that the other council members do as well, for somebody who's on the water, making a living doing this. I did, before I go, Chairman Nowalski, before I go back to you, I did get a comment through the chat, that I'm going to read. It was from someone who was fishing and they weren't able to participate. It says, "Hello, I'm currently out fishing and could lose service or have a haul net back, but wanted to leave a comment. If at all possible, it could make it into the public comment period. Not that we're in public comment right now, but we're asking questions, and I just figured I'd read this into the record before we go ahead and take the motion up. I would like to have Scup possession limit and size stay status quo. Current limits are working and markets seem to be handling the volume currently being landed. The size to 8 inches will create more discards. Current size and limits are working, and I would like to see it stay the same. Thank you all." And this comes from Aaron Williams, Fishing Vessel Tradition and Fishing Vessel Heritage from Stonington, Connecticut. Carson, I do see that on the chat that you thought you might want to add something to this. Is there anything you want to add at this point?
No, I think that's an old chat. Thanks.
Oh, okay, but we're good on this. And so let me ask Mary, because Mary and I talked a few minutes ago. Mary, was this the comment that you mentioned to me that you wanted to put in the record?
Yep, that's the one. So I think we're all
Okay.
good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
okay. Yeah, I was able to bring it up, and yeah, thanks for that. And I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. I don't typically monitor the chat as it's going on, but I'll leave it up for now in case anyone else has anything they want to say. Chairman Nowalski, your hand's still up. Do you have any comment before we go ahead and start the motion process?
So I'd like to do both, make a comment and start with a motion. If you're ready for that after my comment, Mr. Chairman, my comment was that my earlier line of questioning was in no way to suggest that the council should pursue a policy that would provide for stability, i.e. constant ABCs at the cost of reduced ABCs. That was not my intention at all. My intention was to make sure that we had a method in place that we could consider that, so that I think that what we've done recently with the risk policy, especially for these species that are very high biomasses, have been very beneficial to the industry, have given us other flexibilities on the recreational side as well that we might not have had otherwise. I don't want a conversation about, well, because of where we are with the risk policy with our P star of 0.49, now we can't have constant quotas. I don't want to see us wind up going back to the risk policy again to undo what we did, again, which I think was very positive, particularly for these very high biomass species. So I just want to make that abundantly clear that that was the purpose of my comments earlier. So with regards to a motion, if you're ready, Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead and make that motion on behalf
please
of
do,
both
Adam.
the council and the board.
Okay, yeah.
I'm going to go with the monitoring committee recommendation, move to adopt the following specifications for Scup. For 2022, the recreational ACL equals ACT equals 7.06 million pounds, resulting in an RHL of 6.08 million pounds. The commercial ACL equals ACT equals 25.05 million pounds, resulting in a commercial quota of 20.38 million pounds. For 2023, the recreational ACL equals ACT equals 6.53 million pounds, resulting in an RHL of 5.41 million pounds. The commercial ACL equals ACT equals 23.15 million pounds, resulting in a commercial quota of 17.87 million pounds. I'll certainly make that motion. I'd like to make it on behalf of both the board and the council, unless you feel it's out of line to me making that motion as board chair for the board, in which case I'll let you defer to another board member.
Oh, no, absolutely not, Adam. You're more than welcome to make that motion on behalf of the council and the board. Let me go to the council first to see if I see another hand for a second. The first hand I see on behalf of the board is Tony Delernia. Tony, are you going to make that motion on behalf of the council?
Yes, sir, on behalf of the council.
Okay. And then I see David Borden's hand on behalf of the board. David, are you seconding that motion on behalf of the board?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Any discussion on the motion? I'll turn to Adam, Tony, and David first, if they want to make any comments regarding the motion. I don't see any hands up at this time, so I'll ask for the rest of the council and board members that are participating today. Does anyone have any discussion on this motion? All right, seeing no hands come up at this time, I'm going to go out to the public. Does anyone from the audience or the public want to make any comment regarding the motion? Bonnie Brady. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, you're
Great.
good.
Bonnie Brady, Long Island Commercial Fishing Association. We support this motion in its entirety for many of the reasons that Mr. Lovegren and Aaron Williams spoke of. We are concerned about the recruitment. We are concerned about an entirely different class of fishing vessel entering the fishery, which would crash New York's fresh fish market. And thank you very much for your time.
All right, thanks, Bonnie. Appreciate you being on the call. Next, I have Katie Almeida. Go ahead, Katie.
Thank you. Katie Almeida from the Town Dog. We also support this.
Yeah, Katie, you're a little distant. If you can maybe get a little closer to your mic.
Yes. One quick second.
There you go. That's better.
You can hear me now? Okay.
I hear you better now. Yeah, you were kind of a little bit, you just sounded like you were far away from your mic.
Okay. Yes, we support this motion. And for the same reasons that Gus brought up and Bonnie just mentioned briefly before me, we are not in support of decreasing the minimum size or upping that quota above the 50, and certainly not to unlimited. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Katie. If both Bonnie and Katie, unless you have something else you want to say, if you guys can both put your hands down. Let me go next to Jeff Kalin. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't going to say anything, but I'll take the bait. Going back to what Greg was talking about earlier, I think, unless we have an economic analysis of any particular condition, we feel strongly that this decision should be made based on science, not somebody's idea of what is the perfect situation for the marketplace, which is actually bigger than the fresh fish market. So I think that was really his point. And looking ahead, I think, we should continue to evaluate the consideration of maybe even eliminating the trip limits or taking a look at the trip limits in 1 and 3 or something, but analyzing the statements that what we're asking for is going to destroy the East Coast scup market. I mean, I don't think that any evaluation from a scientific, I guess you can't call economic science, but from some kind of economic perspective is the only fair way to evaluate statements like that, I think. Or the opportunity to recognize that certain investments are necessary to be able to move a product like Scup, and there is a lot of quota, into markets that aren't the fresh market, into the grocery stores, for example, something we've worked on for a long time. So I think really that's what, I want to put words in Greg's mouth, but that's what we want to talk about. So we'd like to have further evaluation of these ideas, be considered by the council, maybe consider it for a priority for next year, but to have a fair evaluation from an economic perspective about some of the statements that we've been hearing about. We're going to give up on this for this year. I think it's maybe it's just a fact of a very large size of Scup that the 8-inch fish have gone from 80 or 90% mature to 53%. I can understand maybe not going there right now, although as the chairman of the SSC pointed out, we're at twice the MSY SSB MSY target. So I think you could be a little more risky, but so that's somewhat of a defense of why we've made this request. And as far as COVID goes, because we've made those investments, we had one of the best years last year that we've ever had, because we can sell U.S. white fish right out of the Atlantic Ocean to consumers in the grocery stores in the Mid-Atlantic region in New England and so forth. That doesn't happen without taking some risk and making a lot of investments that have been made over the long period of time, here in Cape May. So anyway, I don't want to go on too long, but I did want to speak for a moment. I appreciate the chance to do that, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Jeff, and I totally appreciate where you're coming from. I think your idea about bringing this up as we get into the fall, and we start setting our priorities for next year, this is certainly something that we can look into. I don't want to speak for Chris and staff, but I feel like if this is an issue that you want to be explored, that we can certainly fold it into our work plan. So I appreciate that. No, thanks for your comments.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mike. We'll talk about that later. I appreciate
Yeah, we can talk about it. Maybe we can talk offline a little bit and try to figure out how that could even be something for consideration. So I appreciate you not trying to force feed that at this point, but let's explore it a little bit more. And, you know, as you said, you know, let's see what the science tells us in moving forward. So thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it.
You know, there's one other point I wanted to make, and I apologize for jumping in.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
And that has to do with averaging quota out over time. I also wanted to say, as many people know who know us and over the years, we have asked for that in the past. So I think that smoothing to provide stability, on the other hand, is something that the fishing industry has asked for kind of historically. And I recognize what happens when you run into the P-Star. It's like the third rail. But that was the last point I wanted to make. I wanted to agree that we had asked for those, you know, smoothing out of quotas over time, so you have a little more stability, particularly in the pelagics, I think, historically. So I just wanted to make that point to the council because, you know, that has been important. So thanks.
Yeah. I'm sure you have a lot more points you want to make, but I get it. I get it, Jeff.
I'm done. I'm done.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. We're a little over time limit here. Is there anybody else from the public that would like to make any comment regarding the motion in front of the council and the board at this time? Okay, seeing no hands, I'm going to, I think we did a board. I don't remember, Adam. Did we do board first last time? Or I'll just call the question to the council. How about that? And then we'll go to the board after that. So we have a motion before us. Adam read it into the record as he made the motion for both the council and the board, seconded by the council for by Tony Delernia, and seconded by the board, David Borden. Are there any members of the council that oppose the motion? If you oppose the motion, please raise your hand. Okay, seeing no hands raised, are there any members who want to abstain from the motion? And raise your hand. Okay, seeing no hands at this time, I'm going to go ahead and call the council motion carries based on unanimous consent. And Chairman Nowalski, I'm going to turn it over to you for the board discussion.
Thank you very much. Does the board need to caucus? Not seeing any hands or hearing anything indicating a need to caucus, I will pose the question to the board. Is there any opposition to the motion? I see no opposition through hands raised nor anything verbal. Are there any abstentions? Again, I do not see nor hear any abstentions. The motion carries on unanimous consent without abstention. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Adam, and thanks for everybody's participation in that discussion. We've now set specs, or at least we're moving forward with specs on Scup. Looking at my notes here, we do have an ASMFC Scup FMP review. So before we go to that, let me ask Carson, is there anything on the council side, Carson, that we need to do before we go to the FMP review?
Nope, we're all set. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right, so Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you to chair the FMP review discussion. And this is a board-only discussion. And then we'll take a short break, come back and finish up the day with black sea bass.
Thank you very much. And just for your timing concerns, it is my understanding that staff has indicated that we will not be doing a black sea bass FMP review here today, that because there were no issues to highlight with that, a black sea bass FMP review vote will be conducted via email, if I understand the information I've been given so far.
Okay,
So on to,
no, that's good. Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Yep. So on to the Scup FMP, I'll turn to staff for the presentation for the review.
Oh my God. All right. I had a hard time finding the mute button, but can you hear me now?
Yep, you're good.
All right. It moves to a completely new space, so I apologize about that. I was searching frantically. I should have the presentation up now.
Yep,
All
we
right.
can see the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Sorry about all that. This will be the last time I pop in for a short abbreviated presentation. As I've said before, Carson did a great job of covering many of the sections of the FMP review in her presentation today. So I'll really just jump right back into the plan review team comments and recommendations. So the plan review team noted that Delaware's pot and trap escape vent regulations are not consistent with the Scup FMP. The Scup FMP requires that each escape vent has a side of at least 2.25 inches in length, and the black sea bass requirement for escape vents are slightly smaller. So when this was raised as a small issue with Delaware staff, Delaware's management section discussed it amongst themselves and decided actually against making any changes to their pot regulations, since Delaware has no directed scup fishery with minimal incidental landings. And then further justification was provided by the management section, saying that the larger escape event requirements under the Scup FMP would interfere with Delaware's lobster pot regulations. Now, the PRT didn't highlight Delaware's escape vent issue as a high priority for a few reasons. The plan review team recognizes that Delaware has very minimal landings, sometimes zero, with less than 0.1% of annual coastwide landings. And while the current de minimis status does not exempt a state from specific gear regulations, the policy board actually is in the process of reviewing de minimis status to potentially expand the policy, which would allow states to apply for specific gear exemptions, which could potentially resolve this issue on its own. This is ongoing and would be picked up at the Commission's annual meeting in October. So with that one exception noted, the plan review team determined that all states have implemented regulations consistent with the FMP requirements. And again, Delaware has requested de minimis status and meets the requirements for 2020. So I'll bring it back to you, Mr. Chair. We do have a draft motion prepared, but we only have that one highlighted issue, and the board can discuss if that's something that's worth pursuing, or given the explanations, whether it's sufficient as is. And I'll take any questions.
Very good. So let's go back to that last slide, if you could, for a minute. Before we go to a motion, let me ask, is there discussion on this item? I don't know if Delaware wants to put anything on the record regarding it themselves, not to put you on the spot, but is there any other board member that wants to discuss this before we go to a motion? All right, I'm not seeing any hands or hearing anything. So if staff would then next go ahead and put up a motion regarding the approval of the FMP review, and then I'll turn to the board to see if someone would like to make the staff recommended motion or another motion related to this agenda item. All right, staff has put something up on the screen as a prospective motion. Is there anyone that would like to make this motion or another motion on behalf of the board? Tom Foti, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I do.
Would you like to make this motion?
Yes.
And if you would kindly read it into the record for us, it would be appreciated.
Move to approve the Scup FMP review for the 2020 fishing year, state compliance reports and de minimis request for Delaware.
Thank you very much, Tom. Dave Borden, I see your hand up. Are you seconding the motion?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Is there any further discussion on the motion? Tom, is your hand up to further discuss it or still up as maker of the motion?
Still up as maker. Took it down.
Very good. I see it's now down. Thanks very much. Is there any need for any comment from the public on the motion? Not hearing or seeing any hands. Is there any need for the board to caucus? Again, no hands or anything verbal. I will then turn to the board for the motion. Is there any opposition to the motion? I am not seeing any opposition nor hearing any. Are there any abstentions on this motion? Again, no hands raised nor any verbal abstentions. The motion carries by unanimous consent without abstention. I'll turn back to staff. Is there anything else we need to address on this topic or anything else to come specifically before the board on Scup?
No, I think we're all set. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Chairman Luisi, I'll turn it back to you for next steps.
Okay, thanks, Adam, and thanks, Dustin, for your presentation. I have 3:20 and on my computer here, so let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 3:30 and we'll pick up black sea bass specifications for 2022 and 2023. Give everybody a chance to stretch your legs a little bit and move around. We'll come back in 10 minutes. Thanks.